You ever get that gut feeling someone's been snooping where they shouldn't? That itch at the back of your neck that tells you someone crossed a line? Yeah, that was me last Saturday morning, standing in my driveway with a coffee in one hand and a busted padlock in the other. It didn't take a genius to figure out what happened. The barn door was cracked open just enough to make me want to hurl my mug across the gravel. I knew exactly who'd done it before I even walked over. Priscilla Thornbridge. She's the HOA president here in Pine Creek Estates, wears pastel pantsuits like she's running for Congress, and walks around like she owns every blade of grass on your lawn. The kind of woman who peers into your trash bins to make sure your recycling is sorted by color. I never wanted to be in an HOA, but when I bought this property 3 years ago, 5 acres, small farmhouse, and a barn built by my great-grandfather, I didn't know they were slowly expanding their jurisdiction. They annexed the outer road last year, claiming they needed to preserve the visual harmony of the neighborhood. What they really wanted was control. And I was the last holdout with actual land. The HOA hated that, especially Priscilla. She'd already tried sending notices about my unsanctioned agricultural structure, my barn, even though it's been here since the 40s. She tried fining me for livestock odors because my cousin left a goat here for one weekend. And she's shown up uninvited more than once, trying to peer through the slats in the barn walls. But this time, she went too far. I stepped inside and there were muddy footprints across the concrete. A few empty Tupperware containers sat on my workbench, and the tarp covering the old tractor was pulled back. She was looking for something, probably anything to write me up for. I'd been ignoring her threats, and I figured she was getting desperate. But breaking and entering? That's a whole new level of crazy. I checked the security cam mounted just inside the barn. The motion sensor had kicked on around 6:42 that morning. Sure enough, there she was, Priscilla in her peach blazer, crouched low like a raccoon, using a pair of bolt cutters to snap the padlock. She slipped inside like she owned the place. I grinned despite myself. She was still in there. I stepped back outside, swung the barn door shut, and slid the bolt lock across. This one, she hadn't seen it was behind the outer frame, welded into the steel. Reinforced, too. I clicked it into place and walked back to the house like it was any other Saturday morning. Let her stew in there. I called the sheriff's office and gave them the rundown. They already knew me. I'm not the kind of guy who calls the cops for every little thing. But this wasn't little. I laid it out clear. HOA president, trespassing, forced entry, and possibly tampering with private property. Stay put, the dispatcher told me. We'll send someone out. I poured myself another cup of coffee and waited on the porch. Wasn't long before I heard the banging. Hello? Open this door right now. Her voice echoed across the field like a wounded duck. I leaned back in the chair and sipped my coffee. You're trespassing, Priscilla, I yelled. You broke the lock. That's a crime, in case you forgot. This is an HOA matter, she screeched. You're harboring unapproved equipment and I have every right to investigate. You're not a cop, I shouted back. And this isn't even under your jurisdiction, no matter how many fake maps you print. She pounded on the inside of the barn again. This is illegal confinement. I'll have you arrested. I just laughed. Go ahead and try. About 20 minutes later, the sheriff's cruiser rolled up the dirt road. Deputy Carson stepped out, chewing gum like he had all the time in the world. He was young but not stupid. I'd shown him the footage, already sent it straight to his phone. You got her locked in there? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Yep, I said. She didn't knock first. He nodded. Sounds like she's about to find out what a warrant is. We walked over together and I unlocked the door. The second it creaked open, Priscilla stormed out like a wet cat, hair frazzled and blazer smudged with dust. You, she pointed at me, eyes wild. You'll be hearing from my attorney. You can't trap people like animals. Deputy Carson stepped between us. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down. Did you enter this structure without permission? I was doing an inspection, she snapped. HOA regulations allow for— No, ma'am, he cut her off. You broke a lock and entered private property. That's criminal trespassing and destruction of property at minimum. Her mouth dropped open. I am the HOA president, and I'm a deputy sheriff, he said calmly. That title doesn't give you the right to break into a man's barn. She started arguing, fast and high-pitched, but he already had the cuffs out. I didn't expect that part, honestly. Thought maybe a warning or a citation. But apparently, this wasn't her first rodeo. Carson told me she'd been reported before for similar behavior in another part of the county. Always managed to weasel out of it. Not this time. He arrested her right then and there, read her rights while she kept yelling about bylaws and community standards. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her get loaded into the cruiser. Felt like justice. Real, satisfying, loud-mouthed justice. But I knew this wasn't over. HOAs like this one don't just give up. Especially not when their queen bee gets humiliated in front of the whole neighborhood. I had a feeling the rest of the board would come slithering out soon enough, trying to spin it. But I was ready. They wanted a war? They just kicked the wrong hornet's nest. By Monday morning, word had spread faster than a brush fire in August. I didn't have to check the neighborhood Facebook group to know the gossip was boiling over. Trucks slowed down when they passed my place. Some drivers gave me a thumbs up. Others didn't look at all. But the silence from the HOA was the loudest noise of all. The board didn't issue a statement. No apology. No explanation. Just a tight-lipped silence, like they were hoping if they didn't say anything, people would forget their fearless leader had been hauled off in handcuffs for breaking into someone's barn. But I knew better than to think they were licking their wounds. This was a regroup. A strategic pause. The kind of quiet you get before a snake strikes. I was in town picking up some fencing supplies when I got a call from Deputy Carson. They posted bail, he said. She's out. I figured as much, I replied, loading a box of galvanized nails into the truck bed. That mean you're dropping the charges? He snorted. Not a chance. The DA's office already filed. Burglary and criminal mischief. You've got good footage, and she admitted to entering. Well, she didn't just enter, I said. She rummaged through my stuff. If you ask me, she was looking for something. There was a pause on the other end. You think she was trying to plant something? I don't know, I said. But I'm not ruling it out. He told me the investigators would be out to take a closer look at the barn later that week, just to document everything. I told him I'd leave things untouched until then. Back home, I reviewed the footage again. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before. At 6:45, just 3 minutes after she entered, she paused by the back wall. She crouched, reached behind one of the tool racks, and stayed there for a solid 20 seconds. Her body blocked the camera angle, but her shoulders were moving like she was fiddling with something. That part of the barn hadn't been touched in months. There was no reason to go back there unless you were looking for something or leaving something behind. I grabbed an old pair of gloves and went out to investigate. The rack was bolted to the wall, but there was a half-inch gap behind it. I reached down and felt around the floorboards. My fingers hit something smooth and hard about the size of a wallet. I pulled it out. It was a small black case with no markings. I opened it, careful not to smudge anything. Inside was a flash drive. No labels. No explanation. I didn't plug it in. I wasn't stupid. For all I knew, it could be loaded with malware or a virus. Or worse, it could be bait. Something she could find later and claim I was hiding. Instead, I sealed it in a plastic bag, labeled the time and date, and called Deputy Carson again. He didn't sound surprised. We'll have one of our tech guys take a look, he said. Good call not to plug it in. If she planted it, we'll find out. That night, I locked up every tool, double-checked the gates, and replaced all the padlocks. I even installed a second motion light behind the barn. The place looked like a rural version of Fort Knox. The next day, I got a letter taped to my mailbox. No postage. No return address. It was a formal notice of non-compliance. According to the letter, I was in violation of several recently adopted HOA policies, including Unauthorized use of floodlighting after dark, unapproved exterior security installations, disruptive property modifications, hostile behavior toward board members. I read the letter twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so pathetic. Whoever wrote it didn't even bother to use HOA letterhead. The font was some curly script that looked like it came from a wedding invitation template. I wasn't going to humor them with a response. Instead, I drove straight to the courthouse and filed a formal complaint with the county zoning office. Turns out the HOA had submitted a request last year trying to redraw the neighborhood boundaries to include my land under their full jurisdiction. The request was denied. Twice. On paper, I was still outside their formal control. Any attempts to enforce rules on my property were, legally speaking, hot air. The clerk pulled the file and made me copies of the denial letters. They were stamped and signed. Official as it gets. I don't know why they keep trying, she said as she handed me the pages. That board's got a reputation. When I got home, I emailed the documents to Deputy Carson and copied the county prosecutor's office. I figured if Priscilla or her cronies tried anything else, it'd help to have a paper trail. 2 days later, I got a call from a woman named Susan Lark who introduced herself as a private attorney representing multiple homeowners in Pine Creek Estates. I heard about what happened, she said. A few of your neighbors reached out to me. You may not know this, but there's been a pattern of misconduct from the HOA board going back years. People are scared to come forward. You're the first one to fight back. I leaned against the truck bed, listening. Go on. She explained that several residents had been fined for infractions that weren't in the bylaws. One man had his mailbox removed without notice after refusing to pay a landscaping fee that didn't apply to his property. Another woman was threatened with foreclosure over a phantom debt that was never documented. They've been bullying people into compliance, she said. But now that there's a criminal case, we may have a chance to expose them publicly. She asked if I'd be willing to speak at the next HOA meeting. Not as a member, but as a guest. On record, I said yes. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening in the community clubhouse. I showed up 10 minutes early, wearing clean jeans and boots still dusty from the field. The room was already packed. Folding chairs lined the walls. People stood in the back, whispering. Priscilla wasn't there. Instead, her second in command, a balding man named Curtis Wellman, stood at the podium, clutching a clipboard like it was a shield. We'll begin with community announcements, he said, voice barely rising over the murmurs. Then we'll open the floor to discussion. He tried to plow through the agenda, but no one was listening. All eyes were on me. After 15 minutes, Susan raised her hand. I'd like to yield my time to Mr. Adam Holt. A few people clapped. Curtis shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Holt is not a member of this HOA, he said, eyes darting. That's correct, I said, stepping forward. And that's the whole point. I laid it out calmly and clearly. The trespassing, the footage, the planted flash drive, the zoning denials. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult anyone. I just told the truth. And when I finished, I handed a copy of the zoning file to Curtis. This is a matter of public record. Your board has no authority over my property. Any future attempts to enforce rules on me or anyone else outside your boundaries will be met with legal action. There was silence. Then someone in the back shouted, What about the fines you sent me last month? Curtis? You said they were mandatory. Curtis didn't answer. Another voice. You told me I couldn't park my truck in my own driveway. The floodgates opened. People weren't angry, they were furious. And it wasn't just about me. It was about years of being pushed around, charged for nothing, threatened with everything. Curtis paled. Sweat gathered at his collar. He tried to speak, but Susan stepped in. We're organizing a petition to audit the HOA's finances, she said. If you've been assessed a fee without documentation, we want to hear from you. I walked out into the night air, the clubhouse still full of voices rising in waves behind me. felt different now. The tide had shifted, and for the first time in years, Pine Creek Estates didn't sound so quiet. 2 days after the HOA meeting, my landline rang just after 7 in the morning. I picked up still half asleep, expecting a telemarketer. Instead, I heard Deputy Carson's voice, clipped and low. "You alone?" I sat up straight. "Yeah. Why?" "We got a situation. You remember that flash drive?" "Hard to forget." "Well, Tech Division cracked it. It's not malware. It's documents. Hundreds of them." I rubbed my jaw. "What kind of documents?" "Financials. Spreadsheets. Internal memos. Stuff that shouldn't be floating around, let alone hidden in your barn. Some of it's redacted, but a lot isn't. There's evidence of misappropriated HOA dues, altered invoices, and phony contractor payouts. One of them's a check addressed to someone named Kenneth Thornbridge. Priscilla's husband? Looks that way." I let out a slow breath and leaned back in the chair. "So they were funneling HOA money?" "Looks like it. We're pulling in a financial crimes investigator. I'm warning you now, this thing's bigger than your barn. You might start getting pressure from people who don't want this mess aired out." "Let them try," I said. That afternoon, I noticed a dark blue sedan parked down the road near the old mail stand. Never saw it before. Kept its engine running, windows tinted. It didn't move for 20 minutes. I walked up the driveway with a rake over my shoulder and waved. The car pulled away without stopping. I didn't like coincidences. That night, I went through my old trail cam footage from the past week. Not just the barn. I had one mounted by the woods near the fence line, facing the back field. I didn't expect to find anything interesting, but at 2:30 in the morning last Thursday, a figure appeared on screen. A man, thin, flashlight in hand. He didn't step onto the property, just stood at the edge, watching. I copied the clip and emailed it to Carson. He replied within 5 minutes. Not one of ours. The next morning, I drove into town and met Susan Lark at her office. She looked tired but focused, her desk buried in folders and handwritten notes. "We've got over 30 homeowners signed onto the petition," she said. "That's enough to demand a full audit. But there's something else." She handed me a printed email. It was from a former HOA board member named Janine Lowe. She'd moved out of state a year ago but saw the videos of the meeting online. Turns out she'd been quietly documenting shady activity during her last 6 months on the board, including a secret vote to authorize a $5,000 legal risk mitigation fee that never appeared in the budget. That money went to Thornbridge Consulting, Susan said, which doesn't legally exist. No registration, no LLC, no tax ID. It's just a mailbox in a strip mall over in Chestnut Hollow. "So they're laundering HOA funds through a fake company," I said. "Looks that way." Susan and I drove out there later that day. The address led us to a rundown storefront with a broken neon sign that read Copy and Ship Depot. Box number 57 sat in the back corner of the rental wall. We spoke to the clerk, a college kid who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. "I've seen the guy who checks that box," he said. "Late 40s, maybe 50. Wears a jacket with a crest on it. Doesn't say much." We showed him a photo of Kenneth Thornbridge. The kid nodded. "That's him." Susan added the info to her case file. I placed a call to the County Fraud Division and left a message with everything we'd found. By the end of the week, an investigator named Valerie Singh was assigned to the case. She requested a full copy of the flash drive and all supporting documentation. "This has the makings of an embezzlement ring," she said when we met at her office. "And if HOA dues were used for personal gain, we're looking at felony charges." As more details came to light, things started to unravel fast. A homeowner named Greg Julian came forward with a receipt showing he'd paid over $800 in emergency improvement fees after being threatened with liens. The work was never done. Another neighbor, Linda, found out she'd been double billed for landscaping services, once through her bank and once through a third-party vendor she'd never authorized. It was like peeling back rotten wallpaper. Every layer revealed more rot. That weekend, the HOA tried to hold an emergency meeting, but only 3 board members showed up. Half the room walked out when Curtis tried to dismiss the allegations as fabricated drama. Someone threw a copy of the audit petition on the table before storming out. The next day, Curtis resigned. That left Priscilla. She hadn't been seen in public since the arrest. Rumor had it she'd hired a criminal defense attorney from the city. One of those suits who charges $1,000 just to breathe near a file. But it didn't matter how much she paid. The evidence was overwhelming. On Monday, Valerie Singh visited my property with a forensic accountant in tow. They inspected the barn, took photos of where the flash drive had been hidden, and confirmed the timestamps on the footage I'd provided. That drive was intentionally stashed, Valerie said. My guess is she panicked. Maybe someone on the board told her to hide it. Or she was planning to retrieve it later, I added. Either way, it's obstruction. The DA's office filed new charges against Priscilla on Tuesday: 3 counts of financial fraud, 1 count of evidence tampering, and a separate charge for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Kenneth Thornbridge was named as an unindicted co-conspirator pending further investigation. That same afternoon, a local news van showed up on the edge of the development. A reporter knocked on my door asking if I'd be willing to speak on camera. I agreed, but only on one condition. We filmed the interview in front of the barn. I told them what happened, start to finish. I didn't embellish. Didn't need to. The truth was more than enough. I showed them the paperwork, the zoning denial, the footage. They ran the story that night under the headline, HOA Horror Story, President Arrested After Breaking into Private Property. The community response was immediate. More homeowners came forward, some even from other neighborhoods recognizing similar patterns. Turns out Priscilla had served on 2 other HOAs before Pine Creek Estates. Both had seen sudden turnover, missing funds, and unexplained fees. By Friday, a class action lawsuit was forming. Susan agreed to represent the homeowners pro bono for the initial filings. Valerie's office confirmed a grand jury would be reviewing the case within the month. I stood at the edge of my field that evening, watching the sunset over the treeline. The barn was quiet, locked, safe. A hawk circled overhead, casting a long shadow across the grass. I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't over. Legal wheels turn slow. People like Priscilla don't vanish, they shift, regroup, and reappear somewhere else under a different name or title. But here, in Pine Creek Estates, her grip was broken. The board was being dissolved. A new election was being organized, this time with oversight from the county. A third-party audit team would review every financial record from the past 5 years. Some folks asked me if I'd run for the new board. I told them no. I didn't want power. I just wanted my land respected and my neighbors free from fear. As for the barn, I installed a reinforced steel door, motion lights on all corners, and a new lock system that required a code and a key. Not because I was scared, but because I'd earned the right to protect what was mine without interference. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. This one was official. No threats. No fake fines. It was from the county clerk. It read, Notice of Jurisdictional Clarification, Lot 17 and surrounding acreage is formally recognized as non-HOA governed land. Stamped. Sealed. Final. I pinned it to the wall inside the barn, right beside a photo of my grandfather standing in front of the same door 70 years earlier. People like Priscilla think they're above the rules. They count on fear. On silence. On people not knowing their rights. But sometimes all it takes is one locked door and a camera in the right place. And a little patience while the walls come crashing down. It started with a knock at my door just after dawn. Not a frantic one, measured, polite. I was already up working on repairing a busted hinge on the front gate. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened the door to find Valerie Singh standing there, her dark blazer dusted faintly with road grit, a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. You might want to get dressed, she said. There's been a development. I nodded, stepped aside, and gestured her in. The grand jury returned the indictments, she said as I poured coffee. Not just Priscilla. Kenneth's now officially charged as a co-conspirator. But that's not the big part. She slid a folder across my kitchen table. I opened it expecting more financial statements or emails. Instead, I found a series of scanned permits signed contracts between the HOA and a security firm I'd never heard of. Westfield Asset Protection. Never saw them out here, I said. They weren't hired to patrol, Valerie replied. They were never meant to be seen. She tapped one of the contracts. This company was paid over $75,000 across 18 months to conduct compliance assessments using remote surveillance. They installed hidden cameras on street signs, inside irrigation control boxes, even in decorative rocks along the Greenbelt trails. My stomach turned. They were spying on people? Illegally, she said. None of the homeowners were notified. And it gets worse, your property was on their watch list. I looked up sharply. They put surveillance on land they didn't even have jurisdiction over? She nodded. We found 2 active devices near the edge of your west fence line. One was disguised as a birdhouse. The other was wedged into the base of a utility pole. Both were transmitting data back to a private server registered in Kenneth Thornbridge's name. I didn't speak for a long moment. I was thinking about all the times I'd walked that fence line, the times I'd sat out on the porch with a cold drink, the nights I'd lit a fire in the pit with friends. All of it watched. Valerie pulled out a second folder, this one thicker. These internal memos show the board authorized the surveillance to track potential troublemakers. Anyone who spoke up at meetings. Anyone who filed complaints. They kept files, some of them with photos, vehicle plates, even private schedules. I didn't ask how they got the schedules. Valerie sat back and exhaled. This isn't just HOA overreach anymore. This is targeted harassment, stalking, and a violation of state surveillance laws. We've opened a second investigation. You think they were planning to use that footage to blackmail people? I asked. We don't have proof of that yet, she said. But I wouldn't rule it out. That evening, I met Susan Lark at the community park. She'd called for an emergency gathering of the petitioners and anyone affected by the surveillance. Word had spread fast. Over 60 people showed up, crowding the benches and walking paths. I recognized Greg Julian pacing near the edge, and Linda holding a folder stuffed with receipts. Susan raised her voice without a mic. We've confirmed that private surveillance was conducted on this neighborhood without consent or legal justification. The footage collected could have been used for anything: intimidation, manipulation, worse. The crowd buzzed. Some people looked angry. Others looked scared. I stepped forward and held up one of the photos Valerie had given me. A still frame from a camera hidden in someone's mailbox post, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. That's my driveway, I said. They watched me for months. And they didn't stop with me. They recorded your kids riding bikes. They caught your private conversations. This isn't about fines anymore. This is about rights. Someone shouted from the back. What do we do now? Susan turned toward the crowd. We press charges. As a group. By the end of the night, 34 people had signed affidavits. Valerie's team collected them all and began coordinating with the district attorney. The case was no longer just civil, it was criminal and expanding. 3 days later, Kenneth Thornbridge was arrested without incident at a golf course across town. His bail was denied. The judge cited risk of evidence tampering and potential flight. That same morning, the sheriff's office served a search warrant on the HOA clubhouse. Deputies hauled out boxes of documents, hard drives, and a safe they found bolted to the floor. According to Valerie, the safe contained over $20,000 in unreported cash, a burner phone, and a second flash drive, this one encrypted. By the end of the week, the county declared the HOA board inactive and placed the community under temporary administrative oversight. A retired municipal auditor was appointed to oversee the transition. I thought that would be the end of it. Then, 2 nights later, my motion light by the barn clicked on at 2 in the morning. I was already awake, going over some diagrams for a new drainage system in my field. I grabbed the shotgun and stepped out onto the porch. I didn't fire, just stood there, 30 feet from the barn, eyes scanning the darkness. There was no one there. But the birdhouse camera was back. Not the same one. A new one. Mounted in the same spot. I dismantled it and drove it straight to Valerie's office. She looked at it, then at me. "That's not the same model," she said. "Westfield used Gen-Tech micro units. This is a different manufacturer," meaning someone else put it there. She nodded. "We'll trace the parts." But this wasn't authorized surveillance. Whoever did this went rogue. Back at the neighborhood, rumors spread that a few former board loyalists were trying to salvage what was left of the old group. A man named Dean Weller, someone who rarely showed up to meetings before, was handing out flyers claiming the charges were overblown and politically motivated. He came to my property line the next afternoon, waving one of his flyers like a flag. "We need to talk," he said. "No, we don't," I replied. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," he said. "Priscilla had some faults. Sure. But she was trying to keep this place from turning into a junkyard." I walked right up to the fence. "My barn isn't junk. My land isn't yours. And Priscilla's in jail because she committed crimes. If you want to go down with her, keep talking." He backed off after that. The investigation continued for 3 more weeks. Valerie's team uncovered more shell companies tied to Kenneth, at least 4, that had been billing the HOA for landscaping, fencing repairs, and code enforcement. None of the services had ever been performed. The judge approved asset seizures on all accounts tied to the Thornbridges. Over $120,000 were recovered and earmarked for restitution to the homeowners. At the final hearing, Priscilla pleaded no contest to 3 felony charges. She avoided jail time in exchange for full cooperation, permanent banishment from any future HOA leadership, and financial restitution to the community. Kenneth wasn't as lucky. He was sentenced to 7 years. The neighborhood elected a new board that month. I didn't run, but I did attend the first meeting. The new president, a retired school principal named Harold Bennett, stood at the front of the room holding a gavel that looked like it hadn't been used in years. "No more secret votes," he said. "No more fines without documentation. And no more surveillance. Ever." The room erupted in applause. I walked out into the night afterward, the air cool and quiet. My barn stood dark and still in the distance, no movement, no lights. Just the way it should be. Later that week, I installed a final sign at the edge of my property. Black lettering on metal mounted on a cedar post: "Private land, no trespassing, not subject to HOA jurisdiction." It didn't need to be big. Just clear. No confusion. No loopholes. No leverage. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a community again, not a kingdom ruled by fear. And me? I had my land, my barn, and my peace back, which was all I ever wanted.